Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to Behind the Book with myself, Tess, and my co-host, Karen. I forgot what I was about to say. Yeah, I'm like, wait, what are we doing? Yes, well, it's a Monday. That's my excuse. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You, however, are having trouble remembering who you are, so I would say you're not doing quite as well.
I know. So my office is in one part of the house, and I have to walk through where my husband is working when I go to get tea or, a snack or whatever. And he said, "Are you okay? You don't look like you feel good." And I was like, "I just feel exhausted." And he's like, "Well, it's just Monday. Just get through Monday. Tomorrow will be Tuesday and you'll be better." I'm like, "Okay."
That's good advice. I just recently read something where someone said, you never have to do today again. You're done. Put it behind you. So if it was a terrible day, it's over.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's great. I'm going to tell that to the kids.
I like that better than tomorrow is another day because that seems obvious.
Yeah.
And the idea of putting today behind you that you don't have to do it again is also obvious, but I had never heard it expressed that way.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Well, we had a really amazing guest on today, Lauren Fox, and we had her scheduled earlier, and then I got COVID, and then she had a conflict. So we finally were able to touch base with her, and I was glad that we finally got to meet her because I was looking forward to it, and she did not disappoint.
Not at all. And actually, Lauren Fox has been on my radar since her first book because we live not too far away from each other and we know some writer friends in common. So in true Karen McQuestion fashion, mentally she was already a friend. Like, I know someone who knows someone who knows someone. Therefore, I'm sure that we would just hit it off and be friends. Lauren didn't know that we were already friends, but she was still really fun to talk to and really pleasant. So I think I'm on my way.
Yeah, and she had some really insightful things to say, I think, about the process and about self-doubt and all that. So I think our listeners will really enjoy it and get a lot out of it.
I think so as well.
On with the show. Today on Behind the Book, we're excited to have Lauren Fox with us. She is the author of 4 novels, the most recent of which, Send for Me, was an instant New York Times bestseller and a Today Show #ReadWithJenna book club pick. Other writing credits include publication in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, Parenting, and Psychology Today. She lives in Milwaukee with her husband and 2 daughters. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we are always curious about the path to publication. Did you always want to be a novelist? And tell us your journey.
I think I always wanted to be a writer. I don't know that I always wanted to be a novelist. I think I didn't really know that was a possibility until my 3rd novel was published. I think I always wanted to be a writer, and it was really the only thing I really identified as a writer and have done so my whole life. And I majored in English at UW-Madison with a concentration on creative writing. And I took a few years off and did other things, but I always kind of had I was always kind of aiming towards being a writer. So I ended up in graduate school at the University of Minnesota in creative writing with a concentration in creative nonfiction. And then when I graduated the 2-year program in 5 years. That's kind of my path to publication. Things that should have taken 2 years took 5 years. And then I freelanced for a while. I sort of thought I would write for magazines, but this was kind of in the waning days of print publications. I was freelancing. I would get an article published in 17 and, something in Glamour. So it kind of looked like I was freelancing, but every article would take me a year to get published. So then I moved back here with my husband in 2000. He got a job at UWM and he was like, we finally have insurance. So why don't you take some time and try to write that novel that you've been talking about writing? So I promptly got pregnant and so 7 years later, my first novel was published.
That's a very familiar story to us.
Yeah, right? It was baby book baby, book, no more babies, book, book, and then hopefully more books.
So if someone isn't familiar with your books, is there one that you would suggest they start with?
That's a good question. But it's kind of like, if someone isn't familiar with your children, is there one child you think would be the best for them to maybe, I know you know what I mean. I think, I would just, I guess my first book, Still Life with Husband, and then hopefully that will whet your appetite to read the others.
Your fourth and most recent novel, Send for Me, as I mentioned in the bio, was picked by Jenna Bush, which is amazing. And it's a complete departure from your previous works. How did you come to write it?
Well, it seems like a departure because my other three books are contemporary novels, written in present tense, first person, and they're kind of about like women and relationships. I mean, I feel like when I think about it, I think about this more than, any reader would actually, have the time to consider. But I think they're kind of thematically related. I mean, they're all sort of, I think there's like a darkness and a sadness in all of my books, but maybe it's a little more under the surface than it is in Send for Me. But Send for Me is the story. It's the fictionalized version of my family's story. So I've been working on it. Sometimes I feel like I've been working on it my whole life. My grandparents and mom came from Germany in 1938, and a lot of their family stayed behind and wasn't able to get out. We're Jewish, and I found when I was in my 20s. My grandparents had lived with us for a few years, and all of the contents of their apartment was in our basement, my parents' basement. And when I was in graduate school in Minnesota, I was home visiting, and I was going through their stuff, and I found this little box of letters. It was like I've said this in other interviews, like I don't really believe in magic, and I'm sort of like the least spiritual person I know, but I felt like it was this moment of this incredibly meaningful, powerful, amazing moment. I just knew it was special. It was this little box of letters. They were written on onion skin paper, tied with a pink ribbon, and they were letters that my great grandmother had written to my grandmother between the years 1938 and 1941 while they were trying to leave and trying to, and I can't read German, and they were written in a script that really very few people can still read. It's an old-fashioned script, but I just knew I had stumbled on something, and I found a professor at the University of Minnesota who took a personal interest in this and agreed to work with me and translate them. And I would bring the letters to him, and he would read them. He would like translate them as he was reading them, and I recorded them in my little tape recorder, and then brought them home and transcribed them. And this became part of my nonfiction MFA project. I was trying to write a memoir, but I was only 25. So I didn't really have I hadn't lived enough, and I didn't really have the experience or the material to write a memoir. So I shelved the project after I graduated, but of course it stayed with me for the next 25 years. I mean, it sort of became a part of me. And then I returned to it in, I think, like 2016, actually right around the time Trump was elected. And I started to feel like I had a story that I needed to tell, and that was relevant and important. And I came back to the story, and my agent said, you've written 3 novels. Maybe you should consider writing fiction. Maybe you should consider writing this as a novel. And it had not occurred to me that I could do that. So that's the Reader's Digest version of how I came to write this novel.
And it's a dual timeline narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So in the novel, there's a current present day storyline, and then it goes to the past. Was that very different for you to structure a novel like that?
The original sort of first draft of the novel was just the historical fiction part. And I really didn't want to write the contemporary timeline. I felt like it was too much like the memoir, the failed memoir. But when I was finished with the historical fiction portion of it, I sent it to my editor thinking I was done. And she, read it and got back to me and was like, guess what? You're not done. So I reluctantly wrote that third timeline. And she just said, write the timeline and we'll figure out how to weave it in. So that kind of gave me the permission to just as my daughter likes to remind me, you can't edit a blank page. So I just went for it and, then was able to kind of pull that contemporary timeline apart and weave it through the historical fiction.
I think it's interesting you called it a failed memoir. And I see that with other friends too. We're so hard on ourselves if something doesn't go the way you want to, but it wasn't really failed at all, was it? Because
Good point.
it morphed into this wonderful novel.
Don't you feel like you sit down maybe this is giving away this is revealing too much of myself, but don't you feel like you sit down every morning in front of your computer and go, oh my God, I'm such a piece of crap? I just...
Not those words, but definitely that sentiment. Yes.
Well, especially after you read something really good, and you're just like, oh my God, what am I even doing? This is ridiculous.
Who do I think I am?
Exactly.
Who do I think I am? Yes, those words I know quite well. Now, I want to get back to the fact that the book was picked by Jenna. Jenna
Jenna, yes,
Bush-Hager.
we call it my BFF, Jenna. Yeah.
No, we can just use her first name.
Yeah.
So she said, in searching for a book that was beautifully written and captured the times, a New York Times book editor recommended that I read Send for Me by Lauren Fox. I think I read it in 2 days. Would you mind sharing how you got the news that it had been chosen?
No, I would not mind sharing it. This is like, next to getting married and having babies, this is like the most life-changing, momentous moment of my life. It really was such a game changer and such a career changer. I cannot believe, I still, a year later, can't believe my good luck. It was November, so it was a couple months before. The book was a February pick, and it was November, and I was doing dishes, which kind of tracks. I was in the kitchen doing dishes, and the phone rang, and it was my agent, and she was like, "Lauren, don't go to your computer. Don't look at your email. Don't check your phone." Because she was in a competition with my editor to be the first one to tell me the news. So my editor had been calling on my cell phone, and my agent called my landline. And I stood in the kitchen, like trembling, and my kids were standing, like, I don't know, maybe I screamed or something. I don't know. My husband was in the other room. We have a small house. You can sort of, like, wherever you're standing, you can kind of see everybody. So my kids were standing nearby. My husband was in the other room, and they were staring at me with big eyes. And my agent told me the news, and she's like, "Don't tell anybody." I'm like, "Okay, I won't tell I won't tell a soul." But of course I told my family.
They know what a big deal it was.
The kids didn't at first, but very quickly they did. And I called my mom too. I had to tell my parents, like, this was so, it was like the first few months of COVID. I hadn't seen, my parents live like 10 minutes away from us, and I see them all the time and have always seen them every day. And I hadn't seen them in months. And I was I had to share the good news. I was so excited to tell them. And, it's my mom's story.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's amazing. This is kind of a segue off of our usual questions, but what did your parents think when you told them you were going to major in English with creative writing? Because I went to drama school, so I'm familiar with these types of situations. I'm just curious if they were supportive from the beginning or not.
The thing about my parents is they're so ridiculous. They're like, my mom will be like, "Your hair looks so pretty. Did you wash it?" Like, they're so supportive, to like extremely, extremely supportive. And I mean, they never once, I don't even think it occurred to them to say, like, "Oh, maybe you should consider law school." I mean, I have an older brother who's a lawyer, so maybe that helped. 'Cause they have one successful child. I mean, they're just ridiculous. They're so supportive. And I'm a pretty, like, porous person. I feel like if they had pressured me to do something else, I probably would have done it, but they never did.
Do you think this is a trend now for you, that you'll write historical fiction going forward, or do you think this was a one-off?
I don't know. I really loved the research. It had not occurred to me. Like I said, my three previous books were contemporary fiction, and it hadn't occurred to me that research could be a component of my writing experience. And it was really satisfying, and it gave me a sort of confidence too, like a scaffolding to write the book. It was all very surprising to me. I didn't expect that to be in my toolkit. And so I don't know if I'll write any more historical fiction. It's definitely a possibility, but I feel like I will write more books with a research component to them.
And do you think that having read the letters, that gave you some insights into the way people spoke, the language that they used?
Yeah, for sure. And I do feel like having gotten them translated 25 years ago, and they were so much a part of me for so long. They were sort of inside me, so I felt like I could channel the dialogue and language, not easily, but almost organically.
So when you sit down to start writing a novel, what parts of writing fiction are the easiest for you, and what is the most difficult?
You mean after I sit down and say, "What do you think? What business do you have?"
Exactly.
I really like writing dialogue. I think I have a pretty good ear for dialogue. I feel like we're starting maybe to get out in the world a little more now, but I missed during the lockdown portion of this pandemic, really missed being able to eavesdrop on people, dialogue is fun for me. Plot is hard. I feel like I know intrinsically what it is to be a reader and to want to keep turning the pages. And I know how important, as a writer, I know how important that is to construct a novel for your reader. So to make a piece of writing suspenseful, in whatever that means. So plot is hard for me. I have to work really hard to construct a suspenseful narrative.
At what point do you share a work in progress? And who are your first readers?
When it's in the bookstore. No. I have a writing group which is amazing. It's wonderful. And we've been working together in one form or another for like since I moved here, so for 20 years. And they're my true blue, like they're the people I share my work in progress with. No one else. My husband is an English professor at UWM, so he's a really good reader, but I don't give him my material until very late in the game because I would see him like raise his eyebrow and I'd be like, I have to change everything, I mean, and he would never, but I give stuff to him and to my family very late in the game, largely because I feel like if I've written anything that hits too close to home and they're uncomfortable with, I'll change it. But mostly it's my writing group and my agent and my editor.
So now I'm curious, how many people in your group?
6.
It's a good size.
Yeah, that
You
is.
get a lot of different
Yeah,
opinions.
we keep it that size. It couldn't be any bigger, I don't think.
So do you guys, I'm always curious about this. So do you share a chapter with them and get feedback, or do you guys read full manuscripts? How does that work?
Kind of whatever we need. We try to keep it to, we meet once a month and we try to keep it to 15 pages. But, if somebody needs more help at one point or another in the process, or, or if somebody needs more like brainstorming help, we'll do that. Or in the late stages of it, we'll, happily read another person's full manuscript. But just on a kind of like monthly basis, it's like a 15-page, because when you're reading 15 pages from 5 other people, it takes a lot of time.
So do you keep a list of story ideas as you think of them?
Yeah, I've got a running list. It's like incomprehensible, even to me most of the time. It's a document on my computer where it's everything from like pages and pages of one story or an idea to like random notes that make no sense to me when I look at them again. I found a note the other day. It was like plot question mark. Like what was I thinking?
Oh, that's funny. I know I write little questions to myself as I'm working on something, and later I think, how did I not know that already when I was writing this? So what is there a book you'd recommend for aspiring writers on craft?
I am not a huge fan of like how to. I know that Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott is a really popular one that people have recommended to me, and Stephen King's book is gets a lot of traction. But I just feel like for me, I feel like I learned to write by reading fiction. Craft books don't speak to me, but like I feel like I'm taking a master class when I read a really good novel.
I do that too, and then I'll say, "Oh, nice transition,"
Yeah.
or I like how they wove that in, and then I either feel really deficient in my own writing skills, or it spurs me on to try harder. Depending on my mood that day. But
Yeah, or depending on your mood that minute, right? Like
that's right.
I feel the same way, but and you have to kind of train yourself to read as a writer. That's why I really like listening to music and watching TV. Like I'm not a musician and I don't watch TV with the same like writerly mind that I use when I'm reading a novel, but it takes a lot of focus and concentration to be like, oh, that's what that writer's doing. And that's,
Mhm.
oh, look what they've done. They've brought that character back into this chapter. Like it's an intellectual exercise.
So, is there any writing advice you can give to those just starting out?
I mean, I think that to segue from my last answer, just read really. I mean, I occasionally someone will say to me, like, I want to be a writer, but I'm not a reader. And I'll be like, I'm making right now, you can't see me, but I'm making a shaking motion. Like you have to read, of course, you have to love reading and you have to be. And also, I think I say this to young people, but I mean, I'm talking to myself too. Like, put down your phones and look up and look around and watch and listen because being a writer is living. It means you live in the world, and you sort of take all of that in and then you process it and put it back out there.
Do you have an ideal writer? You have an ideal reader in mind when you write?
One of my teachers at Madison was Jessie Lee Kirchhoff, and I remember her saying, I write for someone who's exactly like me but smarter. And that has been in my mind for 30 years. That's like that's my ideal reader.
That's
exactly
awesome.
Like me but smarter. Yeah.
And hopefully millions of them.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, definitely millions of people smarter than me. Maybe not millions of people exactly like me, but yeah.
So, what would you be doing if you weren't an author? Do you have any ideas?
I feel like I've identified as a writer my whole life, and it's such a weird thing to think about. I mean, I definitely am not always writing, but like, is there anything I could do that would be productive and remunerative? No. I think I'd probably be a high school English teacher. I love, I love reading and I love like sharing and recommending books and talking about books. And I love teenagers. So that would probably be how I would make my living if I weren't a writer.
Yeah, that's an unusual quality to love teenagers.
Both my daughters are my kids are 14 and 19. These ages are just the best. They're just so, I mean, and I love their friends. They're such weirdos and they're so interesting and they're so unformed. They're just so funny. I love them. I mean, maybe they're a special, like maybe I wouldn't love all teenagers, but I love these teenagers.
They're informed, but they're also, I think, in some ways more savvy
Oh
than when
yeah.
I think of myself, and
Oh my God.
more open to like different kinds of music.
Yeah.
And I love that about them.
And they're like they're weirdly patient with me. So I mean, I think and it's so sweet. Like they're like, no, that's not how you do that. Come on.
I know, I'm always amazed how much I have to learn from my kids. Especially like you said, they're just so much more open than even our generation, which,
Mhm.
the generation before us was, even less so. But anyway, back to writing questions here. Have you ever started a novel manuscript and then made the deliberate decision not to finish it?
Oh yes. In particular, I wrote about 100 pages of a novel between my first and second published book. And I was pregnant with my second daughter at the time. And my characters, there's not much plot in this novel. And they just sat around complaining about how tired they were and drinking coffee. I mean, there were some moments for sure in those 100 pages, and I definitely like pulled them out and like created a document with like interesting paragraphs, but really they were not up to much. So that's one for the trash bin.
Were you maybe drawing from your own life at that point?
No, yes, I was.
So, how consumed are you with the story when you're in the middle of writing a book? Do you think about it, dream about it?
It's funny. I can only talk about this with other writers, right? They like the characters live in your head, right? So you're constantly in a conversation with these imaginary people. And it's so fun. It's like such a gift. I remember when I was writing my first novel, I was like embarrassed to tell people that I was writing a novel because it just felt so private, but it felt like I had another, like my daughter was brand new and I was consumed by her, but like it was such I don't really know how to describe how special it is to be working on a novel and to be immersed in it and to have this other part of your brain constantly chugging away.
Absolutely. And I'd even, if I was shopping, I would see an outfit and think, oh, that's just
Right.
like something that,
Yeah.
and it would be your character would wear
Yeah.
or whatever. So it's funny how it bleeds over into,
Mhm.
into your real life like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a point in the manuscript where it clicks sort of, and you're, at least for me, and I'm like, now I know these people, and then it just goes from there.
Yeah.
Who has been your biggest supporter as you built your craft and career?
I am so lucky. I've had so many in my like intimate private life. I haven't had any detractors. Like my husband has been incredibly supportive. I always feel like I should, amend for no good reason. Like he's just been like, you just do this, like when we first got married, and we moved here and he was like, why don't you take this time to write? Like just the kind of faith that he has had in me throughout our lives has just been like just this like quiet engine in my life of support, which is just like it's just I feel so lucky. And you know, you need insurance. You need somebody with a salary. Like it's not writers aren't sort of like self-sufficient, like sitting on a mountaintop, just getting it done. Like you need so much support in so many ways. Like my parents have been wonderful, as I said before. And when my first book was published and I connected with my agent and my editor, I've been with them, the same two women, for the past 15 years, and they've been just incredibly supportive and like foundational in my writing career. So I feel like you asked for one person, but I had to give you all of those people because I've been so lucky.
Well, now I'm really curious. You've mentioned your editor and agent a few times.
Yeah.
When you're working on a book, do you run it past them first? Or, I mean, do you brainstorm story ideas and they tell you what they think would be marketable? Or how does that work for you?
Yeah, I do. I have to varying degrees. Sometimes I just need to be left alone to kind of like, write the first chunk of the novel and see what happens. But so my agent is 5 years younger than I am, and my editor is 10 years younger. And I just stumbled on these two women who share the same sensibility that I do. So I feel like if they say this is working, I feel pretty sure and like secure that it's working. So yeah. So in answer to your question, if I need to, I do. And of course, like, in order to get a contract, you need to like have the stamp of approval. So, it's sort of institutional deadline to make that, so I'm not just like typing away about, women who are just tired and drinking coffee all the time.
So do you plot, you mentioned plot earlier, or are you more of an organic writer?
So not organic. I write an outline, sort of like a paragraph, or like every scene gets a paragraph. And then I'm able to diverge or, throw parts of it away. But I just feel like I need the roadmap. It gives me the like security blanket. So I don't always follow it, but I just need to know kind of what's coming next.
And do the endings always stay consistent for you?
Pretty much. I'm trying to think if I've ever, I guess my third novel, Days of Awe, I had a different ending in mind. And then one of my writing group members was like, "Oh, I think this is your ending." And I was like, "No, you're wrong." And of course he was right. But I think for the most part, I know the ending while I'm still at the very beginning.
So what is your why when it comes to your fiction? So in other words, what are you hoping readers will take from your books? And is it different from book to book?
That's a hard question for me. I work with this woman who is she's in her 70s and she's just starting out trying to write, and she hired me to sort of help her brainstorm and edit. And she used to say, what I want my readers to take from this part of the novel, and I'd stop her and say, that's not our job. Our job isn't to like set an agenda and like convince our readers of anything. It's just to tell a story. So I try to let that guide me. I'm just trying to tell a believable story with empathy, and I'm just trying to like not break the dream. So I think maybe the question for me is like, what am I trying to give to my readers more than what do I want them to take? And so I think that's it. I'm just trying to write a novel in which a reader won't stop and be like, that character wouldn't do that,
Fully immersed in the story.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Are you working on anything new right now that you can share with us?
Yes and no. I don't know about you, but in the past, I've spoken about work in progress, and it just like petrifies it, And then I can't. I've decided not to talk about work in progress. So I'm working on my fifth novel. Hopefully, it won't end up in the trash bin. I'm enjoying it, and there's some research involved, and it's kind of fun. But it's so brand new right now.
Sometimes the beginning stages are the most fun. There's so much potential in the story not told yet.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't like closed any doors or like destroyed any options yet.
Exactly. Or realized you need to rewrite a third of the novel to make this work.
Exactly.
Sounds like Tess knows what she's talking about.
I so want to talk about it. Like that's the irony and the contradiction of it. Like I'm kind of biting my tongue not to tell you guys about it because it's really fun to think about. But I know from bad experience in the past that if I do, it'll stop it.
Well, could you at least tell us how far into the process you are?
Oh, well, I've written 6 very good pages. And I've outlined it, and I'm doing background reading, and I've taken tons and tons of notes. My process is like kind of fuzzy that way.
Do you do character sketches? I know people that do that.
No,
I do not. No,
I don't. I know somebody was just talking to me recently about writing like a psychological analysis of her characters, and I was like, "Whoa, that's an amazing. That is something I will never do, though."
Oh, I know. I have a friend who did like 5-page things on the characters with, their favorite color and their background and their first crush. And I was like, I don't know that I'd want to write the story then. I would feel all tapped out.
I was going to say, I don't do 5 pages, but I do a couple pages.
Really?
What I have
I never do
found
that.
is that it informs the story, because then I know the character so well. I know what they would do during a certain situation that arises or whatever, but I'm also a pantser. So I think that might be why it works for me, because I don't have that plot to go back to and go, okay, what's happening next?
But if your characters are that strong, they're kind of giving you the plot. Like they're talking to you. I kind of am more just, I need to be a little more surprised by my characters, but less surprised by my plot. I mean, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin.
That's so interesting.
You pantsers.
I know.
But yes, I'm a pantser too, but I'm more like Lauren. I like to find out as I go along, but it does cause me a lot of stress. I know there are times I'll say to Greg, that's my husband, I'll say, I'm writing about this character and I don't know what his deal is. I just, like he's got some issue and it hasn't like revealed itself yet, is how I feel.
It is stressful, isn't it? And I feel like it kind of makes me like a little unpleasant to live with at this stage of the game. Like, cause I'm just kind of consumed in my own, like, oh, you wouldn't understand.
It is a unique job, I have to
It
say.
is,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I was thinking about when you were talking about when your kids were little. I have 2 daughters about the same age you do, Lauren, and, I can remember, like, the mundane things, the chopping up bananas and, all these things that you do when the kids are little, and I'd have this whole secret life playing
Yeah.
in my head at the same time, and it's kind of like this, like, precious little secret that you have, which I think is probably why we don't like to talk about our works in progress, because it makes them
Right.
seem silly or something. I don't know, maybe that's
Yeah.
just me.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
When you say silly, I so many times if I'm telling someone about the plot of a book, which I'll do like when I'm nearly done with the manuscript, and I'll say, it's better than I'm making it sound. Because
Yeah.
I don't really know if
Yeah.
that's the case, but I'm aware that however I'm describing it makes it sound silly, as you said.
Don't you think if we were 3 men, if we were 3 white men, we'd be like, "Oh, it's the best plot you've never read anything better."
Oh,
Like we
no.
wouldn't,
That is one of the
we wouldn't.
things I talk about all the time. I talk about it with my husband and with Karen. I'm like, if there's a thread in an author group, and it's always the man who's like, well, here's exactly what you should do. Whereas all the women
Yeah.
are like, oh, yeah, I struggle with that too. I'm not really sure. Good luck.
And yet the books I like best are written by women. So
Um,
take from that what
Yeah,
you will.
yeah.
exactly.
It's just honest to be, it's just like we're just putting it out there. Like everybody must feel the same kind of struggle and trouble that we're admitting to.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, and I tend to think that if you're not, then perhaps you're a little too confident and you need to dig a little deeper. That's because if you're, well, maybe I don't, I'm riddled with self doubt like 24/7. And I think anybody who isn't, like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
I see that with reviews too. I can get 100 reviews that are great, and then one person will say, whatever, and I'll be like, oh, they have a point. Maybe it
Oh,
did
they're
drag in
right.
the middle,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
you know what I'm just, why am I so quick to embrace somebody who's being critical? And I'm
I
thinking
know.
the other people are being nice, like
Right.
they'd be nice to some random writer they've never met.
Or their
So
standards aren't that high. That's what,
thank you, Tess.
that's what I think.
Oh,
Not about
okay.
yours, of course not. Oh my
Thought you were
God.
talking about me.
No, I totally, yeah. But you know what I've done since this book came out? I broke up with Goodreads. I mean, I still appreciate what it does and like what a good community is for readers, but I don't read my reviews on Goodreads anymore. And it's been like revelatory. I feel so much better. Because it's so true. You're like, oh, those good reviews are just, they're probably my friends under aliases. And it's the negative ones that they just get under your skin. And
Oh yeah.
like, why?
Yeah, I know.
If you ever decide to go back to Goodreads, Catherine Center told us that she's got a little trick. She filters it so she only sees the 5-star reviews.
Smart.
And she says that sometimes she'll forget she's done this and she'll think, wow, people are loving this book.
That's hilarious.
I know, but she's such a happy person. So I think we should all take a lesson from that.
I think so, definitely. Well, now we've come to the part of the podcast that we love. We ask these fun extra questions that have nothing to do with writing or being an author.
Oh, good.
And I'll just ask you rapid fire and just
Okay.
say the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh, you don't want that. Okay, I will.
We'll see how this goes.
Okay.
What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Coconut.
We've never had that before.
Despise coconut. I'd be so skinny if every dessert had coconut.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Okay, so have you seen Crazy Ex-Girlfriend?
Not yet.
Rachel Bloom. It looks nothing like me and she's like 20 years younger than I am, but I think we share the same sensibility, the same like weird. Oh, and it's a musical and I can't sing, but I still think we have the same sort of mindset.
Yes, I know that show. I was like, wait, I
Yeah.
can't think of it. But yes, I could see that actually. That would be that's a good cast for you. Yeah.
Well, now I'm going to have to look it up.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
really
sounds
funny. Yeah. That's like,
It's really
fun.
that's one my daughters found that it would not have been on my radar. So
One of the other joys of having kids.
Exactly.
So what superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Oh, flying, without a doubt.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
Oh, I don't think any pleasure should be guilty.
What's the worst job you've ever had?
When I was in high school, I worked at Pier 1, and it wasn't the worst job I ever had, but I am so clumsy that I broke things all the time. So I was probably their worst employee. And I was constantly stressed out that I was going to break something expensive, which I did frequently.
And can I ask, did they make you pay for it?
So this was like 1985. I was in high school. I remember it was an $80 vase. And I probably made like $80 a week. And I was so scared that they were going to make me pay for it, but they didn't. For some reason, they didn't. And I mean, they really should have fired me. They should have been like, we appreciate you, but you have broken too many things.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Oh, probably epidemiology, right? Like now.
Right now, that would be very helpful. What's your favorite scent?
Vanilla.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
You don't know me, but I don't do terrifying things. My my husband used to say, and he said this more than once, like, people don't know how brave you are because it's hard for you just to leave the house. This is like pre-pandemic. Like, it's just, I'm such a scaredy cat.
Oh, we would so get along.
Yeah,
we
I
have
was
to
gonna
get
say
together.
the three of us could hang out. Yeah, in our in our office.
Separately.
Outside.
Yes. What's one thing you're really bad at?
Just one thing.
Just one.
I am so bizarrely directionally impaired. Like, really, really no sense of if there's such a thing as the opposite of a sense of direction, that's what I have. It's kind of like affected I was thinking about this recently. Like, it's kind of kept me from being more of like an adventure. I mean, not that I would be anyway. Who am I kidding? But it's kind of kept me from I can't explore because I just get lost. I got lost. I drove my daughter to work downtown the other day, and all I had to do was turn the car around and go back, and I managed to get lost in the city I grew up in.
I can so relate. I can't even find my way when I'm at the doctor's office and I leave the exam room.
God.
I always say, could you point me back out?
They make it very hard. Everything looks alike in those offices.
Yeah,
I think
that is not your
novel.
fault, Karen. I mean, it's impossible to figure out how to get out.
I just love you guys so much. And this is our last and final question.
Okay.
And people have very strong opinions, one way or the other.
Okay.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
No. I mean, there are definitely days I would want to live over again, but no, not the whole thing. Would you?
It sounds exhausting to me, actually. Yeah.
I was such an anxious kid, and I feel like I've worked so hard to not, I haven't hidden anything during this interview, so you can tell that I'm still kind of a freak, but I wouldn't want to go back and be that terrified 10-year-old again,
No, I agree completely. Well, this has been so much fun, Lauren. I'm so glad that we finally connected.
Me too.
After we had to reschedule a few times because we had a couple snafus on either end, but it was well worth the wait. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Yes, this was
delighted.
super fun. Now I want to all of us to get together and have coffee. Not far from our homes, of course.
So you'll have to come to Wisconsin, Tess.
Oh, yeah. I'm the odd man out, so I'm there. Yeah.
Where are you?
I'm in the suburb of Seattle.
Oh, yeah. So
yeah.
Since you love to travel, I think you need to come here.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm on it. No, I think we should do it. Yeah. Anyway, well,
Absolutely.
This was super fun. Thank you for being on here,
Thank
Lauren.
you.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you so
looking
much.
Forward to
Me
it.
too.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.